Good morning again, and welcome to Davie Street Presbyterian Church. Welcome all Presbyterian women.
Online.
What did they say about the storm may come, but we're here, and look at this wonderful sunshine that God has provided us with today. Up until this morning, we were unsure if we could have it, but how good God is. And welcome to all of you. I'm Chia Handy. We are here celebrating our resilience and survival, and we are very excited to welcome everyone joining us via Zoom, and especially the folks who braved it and came out here today. Welcome.
People are still dying of COVID. Sadly, 30 new deaths were reported.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning. My name is Ruby Daniels. I'm sorry, my mouth is big enough you can hear. But I am the moderator here at Davie Street Presbyterian. I bring you greetings. I welcome you here to our History Month for Educational event, celebrating our resilience and survival. It's going to be led by the Dr. Rhashell Hunter. For those of you who are here with us for the first time, our restrooms are down on the right. Feel free at any point in time to excuse yourself to go out. We also like to thank you and the people who work so hard and diligently to set our tables up. Feel free to get anything off the table that you would like. We want to thank the PW women here at Davie Street. We want to thank West Raleigh. We want to thank everyone who made this weekend possible. God is good, and he's good all the time. And we want to thank everyone. Again, I welcome you here to Davie Street. Thank you.
Good morning again. I'm Dot Killian. I am serving as interim pastor.
We're just starting 15 minutes late.
And Dr. Hunter, as I was thinking about resilience, this came to mind. For Lydia and Eliza, whom I never met, strong-willed, strong-filled, hatred killed, women of my bones, your ghosts and their sisters cry out at my complacency. But I have not forgotten the lashes. I too bear the scars of the institution. I feel the same scorn beating down on my head even as they smile politely. I still hear your voices and I promise to heed them. I will not become enchanted with illusions and other falsities, for I know that your dreams must be carried on my back to the next generation and the next. Your prayers for freedom are yet prayed by me and all of us who loved you. You have given me the hope that was yours, and I have fed from the breast of your children. I have received the love and the strength that you gave to me through them. This was for Lydia and Eliza, whom I never met, my grandmother and my great-grandmother. I wanted to share just a few words as I greet you this morning about resilience as I read over Dr. Hunter's work. And we think of resilience as something or somebody who bounces back after adversity. And I'd like to submit to you that each person in this room is resilient, because each person in this room has bounced back, or you are bouncing back from something. If you hadn't faced adversity before, beginning about this time 2 years ago, you understood what adversity was when the world was hit with a pandemic. But here we are today. As Shia said, we thought last night that we might not be able to be here, but here we are, still trusting, still believing that God is. So again, we greet you in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, and we again welcome you to Davie Street Presbyterian Church.
What a gift it is to gather, just to gather, both online. I guess I wave this way to speak to those folks that are over here. And to just receive the hospitality of Davie Street Presbyterian Church and to be in this space together. It strikes me that so much of our resiliency and survival means being honest about who we are and whose we are and how much we need one another, how much we belong to God and how we belong to each other. So on behalf of West Raleigh, thank you. Thank you for inviting us into this weekend to celebrate the gifts of women together. Thank you for knocking on the right doors of your congregational structure so that we might gather in this space together, both online and here. And thank you for these beautiful tables that remind us of who we are, created in the image of God, nourished and sustained by the gifts of our story and being around these tables. So thank you. Would you like me to open with prayer and then I can introduce Dr. Hunter? Okay, let's pray. Gracious and holy, mighty and nurturing God, we give you thanks for parenting us, for loving us, for whispering us through storms, for gathering us together, for reminding us that in all times and places we belong to you, for giving us the gift of rest, the gift of joy, planting in us the gift of hope and of faith. May the stories that we share today continue to make us both vulnerable and strong, both open and at peace. May we speak words of repair and restoration. May we hear words of justice and lament, so that we may more faithfully walk into a future that you continue to say, it is good, it is good, it is good. In the name of all that is good, we gather as your people, as your women. And all God's children say, hallelujah.
Hallelujah and amen.
As a pastor parent raising 3 daughters in the church as pastor's kids, I'm always grateful when I read in someone's bio that they too are the child of the church, raised by a clergy parent, and still have some faith and some hope and some love for the church. So Dr. Hunter was raised in Dallas, Texas, where she was the daughter of a Presbyterian pastor who served in intercultural churches. And indeed, in the way that connections are made, I believe that Paris Associate Lori Pister knew your dad. Yeah, small world. So from there, she did not go directly into the church, but had a career in dance and drama and voiceovers out of New York City that I do want to hear more about at some point, and then launched her second career in the ministry as a preacher and a teacher, as a scholar, as a servant of congregations in Flint, Michigan, in Chicago, and then working her way into not quite her most recent service, but the most recent long service working for the denomination for 14 years as the director of racial equity and women's intercultural ministries in the National Church Office in Louisville. She still resides in Louisville and is teaching at Union Theological Seminary, shaping a new, what did I even say? Shaping the next generation of preachers and of teachers. She is also an author and has written several articles that have been published, and gosh, starting in 2011 has written 5, is this your 6th liturgy for celebrating the gifts of women, 5 or 6. So really, thank you for the voice that you have brought to this work for decades, for generations. Thank you for being here with us today and helping us gather in this moment and in this space to continue to share our stories and to live in who God calls us to be. Welcome. Thank you.
Grace and peace to you in the name of Jesus Christ. First, I want to check with the people on Zoom and see if you are hearing and seeing okay. And I'm gonna, those of you who are present and visible, I'm gonna ask you to wave and say hello, good morning. All right, there you go. It's important that we bring the folks from Zoom into the room. So first, thank you very much for inviting me and welcoming me. It is a privilege to be here with you today, and I'm very happy to share with you. We're gonna have fun today. So if you were expecting something dry and boring, I hope I don't do that, because we're gonna have fun. All right? Why should we have fun? Well, because God believes in joy. And also because how do you celebrate your resilience without celebrating? So we've come off a really hard period and are still in the midst of things, and every day something changes. Every day something changes. And it's been good though, in some ways. It's been horrible, but it's also been very good because we've gotten back in touch with what's most important. All those things we were doing and we couldn't do, a lot of that stuff we didn't really need to be doing. And so we decided which people we needed to focus on, and we decided which tasks were important, and we have shifted. In my first ministry at Fourth Presbyterian Church of Chicago, I learned that sometimes you have to stop, see where you are, see where you have been, and celebrate. And as Presbyterians, we don't do that enough because we're always evaluating and going on to the other thing. So we don't take the pause to stop and celebrate. So today, it's important for us to celebrate our resilience and our survival, because we didn't have to be here right now. And other people who are, you know, beautiful human beings are not here with us today. So I don't always start with me, but today I thought I would share who I am as a member of a family, a church person, and a Presbyterian. And we're going to start with my first PowerPoint and see if it's working. Just touch something. All right, here's the photo. So that's my mom and my dad. And it's already been given away because somebody's pretty smart. I'm the little smiling kid in the sun. Yeah. And I was talking with Emily about this. This was a period where women wore gloves and hats, and you see every child has a hat on their head. So I just really like this photo. And then you can't see it, but my dad has these unusual looking socks on. So I just think it's very interesting. Okay, slide, you can go to the next slide. And then this was just the baptism slide. Baptism has great meaning for me. The next one. And these are buildings, and they have meaning for me. They have life for me. Church buildings have always had great meaning for me from the time I was a pastor's kid, and I will tell you the truth. I used to play in the church when nobody else was there. Our house was next door to the church. So when I came outside in the morning, there was a playground that was, I felt like my playground. And then was the church was right next to it. And my mother was an educator who was in charge of the nursery school. So we had snack time and naps in the church, and we had the playground outside, and our house was next to the playground. So the photo to the left are the Cloisters of Fourth Presbyterian Church of Chicago. That was my first call as an associate pastor. And then the photo at the bottom right is Community Presbyterian Church of Flint, Michigan, where I served as pastor for 9 years. And I personally, just like the Gothic architecture. It just does something to me. I can't walk into a church without having this these feelings of intrigue and awe and mystery. Can you go back? It kind of, something's happening here. Okay, thank you. And then the one up in the top right is the Presbyterian Center in Louisville, Kentucky, where the national offices of the Presbyterian Church USA are located. I've served as a director there for 14 years. And then you'll see there's a little logo of Louisville Seminary, where I'm currently teaching Presbyterian Heritage and Polity. I didn't put a photo of a building there because we have been teaching by Zoom. So there is no physical space that I inhabit other than my desk in my bedroom, and I'm sure many of you can relate to that. So that's a little bit about me. Now, if you would connect with a partner at your table, if you know the person really well, you might want to pick a different partner. Can you go to the next slide? Oh, okay, there it is. And if you could share, and those of you online, you're gonna do this too, your name, your pronouns and how you prefer to be identified, and answer what is the best mission experience you have ever had. So I'm gonna model this for you. I'm Rhashell Hunter. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And though we're 99.9% genetically similar, we're all in the same human race, I prefer to be identified as African American. A number of other terms were self-imposed on my cultural group, but that one was a self-naming term, so I'm partial to it. And the best mission experience I ever had was a women's ecumenical trip to Israel, Palestine. What I really remember about that trip is a man was leading the women's ecumenical trip from the National Council of Churches. And he planned no lunches, he planned no bathroom breaks, which does not work for women. And we were afraid we were gonna get sick. And so the Presbyterians, it was an ecumenical trip, but it was really funny to watch. The Presbyterians took it over, organized the lunch breaks, organized everything decently and in order. Okay, you have 3 minutes for table conversations, and then we're gonna have the folks on Zoom talking together too. Come back together.
All right.
I
we didn't have
realize
enough
that
time on
everyone
this
may
one.
have not had a chance to share, but we're gonna have more opportunities to do so. So we're gonna come back together. Let me hear a little from you about your good mission trips. We won't have time to have everyone give feedback, but you can just shout out an element that was good, and then we're going to hear from the folks on Zoom. So what was good about, or an element of the mission trips that you talked about? Okay, I heard learning about each other and doing something for someone who needed it. What else? Bonding, yeah. And what else? Oh yes, mission trips are great for getting outside of your comfort zone. Anything else? And what about the folks on Zoom?
All right, the folks on Zoom talked about preparing Christmas at a nursing home and also driving people to the polls to vote. So those were the two that we were able to get to in the time allotted.
Thank you. So what often makes for good mission trips is when you're able to nurture, reignite, or build relationships with others on a trip. You know, when you're with them day after day, depending on how long this mission trip is, and it's sort of, you're out of your comfort zone, you don't have all your creature comforts, you rely on other people, and you rely on those folks who, you know, kind of help you to get through the next step, and sometimes you help them to get through the next step, and you're not always eating the food that you are used to eating, and you don't really have the right shoes sometimes. And the other thing is that you feel a sense of purpose and that your actions are supporting others. And then depending on where you are, accompaniment is important. And that's being present with mission partners to strengthen them and provide an international witness, safeguarding them against reignited violence or harm. So some of the places that we have been were in developing nations with a strong military presence. And because we were present and observing there as Americans, it seemed to help. Sometimes just your being there stops behaviors that aren't good. So we're going to show our agenda today. That's the wrong slide. Oh, is it? Oh, that's the one I just talked about.
Okay, next.
Okay, there we go. So we've already done some of this, and we had the gathering, welcome and prayer, intro, who I am, who we are, celebrating our resilience and survival. We're going to have small group conversations, large group shout out, COVID-19 challenges. We're going to have a dance break. Ooh, ooh, ooh. Spoiler. Small groups, large group shout out, and accepting and giving God's grace. So the next photo is a photo I came across with Presbyterian women from the old Atlantic and Catawba synods in 1958. Has anybody ever heard of Catawba and Atlantic synod? Okay, they were all Black governing bodies. And these women were going to the Presbyterian Women Gathering at Purdue University in 1958. I love this photo. Next slide. I bet you wouldn't be surprised to learn that women sewed masks, cared for soldiers, took health and nursing classes, and learned about nutrition and sanitation methods during the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. And some of you followed in their stead with this pandemic by sewing masks, providing care, whatever you did. Women have been doing this for a very long time. And next slide. And here in 2022, we have opened some of our churches and we're seeking to find the new normal. So it's significant today that we are here in Davie Street Presbyterian Church in this beautifully redesigned space and that we're able to use it for the first time. So thank you to Davie Street Session and leaders for being here today. And next slide. So what exactly is resilience? It is the ability to spring back in shape, of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or stress, such as from family, relationships, health, workplace, and financial stressors. In this pandemic, some people have had all of those. People who, we're still on the last slide. People who survive and thrive well in change have resilience. And now we're gonna get to the next one. And what does survival look like? Surviving is continuing to live and exist in spite of an ordeal, trauma, difficult circumstances, and conditions that seek to kill or destroy. This pandemic was designed to kill or destroy. And currently we are survivors. Okay, next slide. And here's a scripture that guides us. It's from John 10, 9 through 10. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. So life is given to us by our Savior Christ Jesus. Abundant life. Not maybe I can make it through the next day life, but abundant life. All right, we're going to gather one more time in small groups with people at your table, but this time instead of one person, you're going to gather with your whole table and reflect upon this question. How have you found resilience in the COVID-19 pandemic, the pandemic of racism, as well as the political and economic climate? Read it again. How have you found resilience in the COVID-19 pandemic, the pandemic of racism, as well as the political and economic climate?
Okay.
Okay, friends, we're going to come back together. So how have you found resilience? And you can just shout out some of your responses. How have you found resilience? Being adaptable. Oh, being adaptable. Well, how have you been able to be adaptable?
Just by learning technology. Before it may not have been something that you wanted to do, but now it was the way to connect.
Okay, so folks have had to upgrade their digital skills.
Gained 15 pounds. Got pajama bottoms and learned to like my cooking.
Did you all hear that? Gained 15 pounds, got pajama bottoms, and learned to like her cooking.
And then the people at West Raleigh, there were 10 people and one man who actually spent time taking kits and putting them together for making masks for Rex Hospital, for hospice care, for church members, for the rest of the community. And they got closer because they were working on the same project together.
So one of the things that is good for A-types and people that need to be contributing to society is to make sure that you don't focus on yourself so much, but that you engage in some activity that is serving others. And making masks and doing things for other people is a way to not sink in despair, but to be able to find resiliency through it. It can still be hard though, and I want to let you all know, in case you don't know, some of you think, oh, I'm tough, I'm strong, I'm doing really good, and you don't even realize sometimes the stress you're carrying. And it could not be, it could be not traumatic stuff, but just normal everyday stuff right now. And you realize, you don't know you're stressed, but you realize I'm carrying stress. And so you've got to find ways to figure out how you can thrive so that that stress doesn't affect, there's so many illnesses that are occurring that have nothing to do with COVID-19 because of everything we've been going through. And then I think I have a slide later, but people have had mental health challenges related to racism. And we don't think about that. We don't think that racism can kill you, literally, but also just carrying all that stuff around every day. And so you have to find ways to care for yourselves so that you can be resilient and so that you can survive. Not be a victim, but survive. Be a survivor.
Deborah reframed it, and she learned to carry her cell phone and while she was on a conference call and take walks and relieve her stress.
Oh, that's a good idea. I wish they had let me do that. I go to the bathroom, people say, is she coming back? Can I get a cup of coffee? So let me just repeat that so people on Zoom could hear. Carrying around your cell phone, taking walks, anything else?
If I didn't have to speak on a Zoom call, I would use that Zoom call.
Oh gosh, I would have loved to have done that.
I didn't have to speak, I just had to listen. I would use that time.
That's a beautiful thing. So she had the privilege of not having to show her beautiful face and be particularly made up and looking very interested on a Zoom call. And she could walk and exercise and do other things. Anybody else?
permission to acknowledge that we were under stress. So that in the workplace, that we were all trying to be a little more gentle, that we added, in that workplace, just a little bit more understanding that everybody was under.
Okay, and acknowledgement that everyone was in the same boat, sort of. And so there was a little more gentleness. Now, unfortunately, that's not the case for a lot of industries. So you were privileged that people acknowledged that. And in 2020, maybe, but then all of a sudden, no, you're supposed to do exactly everything you did physically with other people from your bedroom. And it was sort of a little impossible for some people. Anything else?
We had one woman who has an adopted son who's low functioning. He had to stop working during the pandemic.
Oh, yeah, that's happened.
Fortunately, he'll start back this next week.
Oh, that's good. So we're going to talk about that too, the great resignation or the big quit. We're going to talk about that in a minute.
We have one woman, we have a lot of comments. Okay, just got back from Montgomery. She said she went down and she took a tour of the 2 museums down there. And she said she would recommend it highly for everyone.
So go on your tours. Being safe, of course, and practicing social distancing.
People took classes.
Oh my goodness, I needed to be hanging out with this group of people. You all were taking classes. I'm waking up early in the morning trying to throw my hair together real quick to get on the Zoom call.
They had several meetings with people in households who had not been able to participate in the past, even in present.
That's a beautiful thing about Zoom. People from everywhere can be on it. And so folks can be out of the country and we had some calls where people were in Africa.
One woman finished genealogical research study on her family. Wow. And she was able to do that. And she's from Richmond, and she went back into her family history and found evidence of some slave ownership there.
Oh, wow.
And so she's done a lot of research since then to really understand, and she has opened her heart since then to understand exactly what people went through.
Okay, so a lot of people during this time where of significant, visible racial inequity have had to examine themselves. And people who are white have had to spend a little bit more time saying, wait a minute, everybody's not making this stuff up. So we haven't been educated, and now we have to educate ourselves because we want to be part of solutions and not part of problems. And so folks have discovered some things in their families and, tried to figure out what are my next steps. I'm not going to sink into the pattern of guilt, but what are my next steps? We're going to need to move on, but thank you very much for sharing. So next slide, please. And okay, so during this pandemic, millions, and I am talking about millions of women have left the workforce. They did it to take care of children, to take care of family members, or because they had high-touch jobs. Think about all those folks that were attending to your needs or people that you know who couldn't do that work anymore. And I'm going to speak for people in this room, your hairdresser and your nail manicure. I haven't had, well, I shouldn't even admit that, but you felt uncomfortable, and also the governors closed down all these places. People who were nurses' aides, people who were doing other things, they couldn't work, so they left the workforce. And a new report found that last year, women globally lost $800 billion in income due to COVID-19, 800 billion. That is of great concern to me, having worked in women's ministries for many years. The other thing I see is that we tend to be going back to some old gender roles, which is very disturbing to me. where the woman does everything at home, cooking, cleaning, I mean, everything. And in certain cultures, it's very pronounced and everyone's at home. So there's more work, there's more stuff to watch, there's more stuff to, and talk about resiliency. Someone I know in my office, and I hadn't heard about this, and I thought it was a great idea. She has 2 special needs kids and she's living with her mother now, she's divorced, and she just gets in her car. She leaves everything and just gets in her car and drives. And that's a great way to make sure you're still sane. It's hard to point to any one reason why 1.8 million women have not returned to the labor force. So there's 1.8 million less women in the labor force now than before COVID-19. Or why in a country that's facing labor shortages, where you see we need workers everywhere you go, you still see so many women unemployed. But think about it. I mean, school was what, just out again, not all that long ago. So who's supposed to take care of kids, and who's supposed to make sure they're instructed, and who's supposed to, and grandparents are doing a lot of this work too. I put this next PowerPoint slide here because this has been the major outing for some of us for 2 years, going to the grocery store. Who would have thought that going to the grocery store would end up being our entertainment? And then the next slide, I like this one. We have become Zoom connoisseurs. I like this slide where everybody is waving hello. And then the next slide. And Sandra Schulman, as I said, president of the American Psychological Association, said that there are mental health consequences of high-profile violent events targeting African Americans. A study I saw said that people who were seniors tended to handle this better than people who were younger. And that's been my experience. People in my office were unable to function sometimes. Now, I live where Breonna Taylor was killed in Louisville, Kentucky. And it was, and people were coming to town to, you know, and it was just debilitating to so many people. So I had to give just a whole lot of personal health days to people because they were expected to work, they were protests. It was just debilitating. It is empowering to get out and protest racial inequity. So that's another way to claim your power and to find resiliency. When I was in Bloomfield, Illinois last year, I think it was last year, it was amazing to me that the majority of people in the streets downtown were young white adults. And they were shouting, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, young white adults. That was amazing to me and made me feel supported. And it was strange to me because that was new. This is just new. Not new in some ways from civil rights movement, but new because everyone in the crowd was white, except for some. They're smart enough to make sure that the speakers are African American because you can't speak for other groups, but it was just amazing to me. And then if you add to the suffering of the pandemic of racism, that COVID-19 death rates for Black and brown people are disproportionately higher than for whites. And also a lot of the essential workers, even the folks that just serve in the grocery store, a lot of them are people who are people of color. I was in a Kroger and a woman told me, she was talking to a friend, that she wasn't talking to me, but she was talking to a friend who came and said, hello, how are you? She said, my sister died and my other sister died. And then someone else in her family had died. And she was an essential worker working in a Kroger grocery store. So I just couldn't even imagine her loss. And then the next slide shows the Great Resignation. And that is also in play these days. It began early in 2021 when workers en masse began to quit their jobs. It's also called the Big Quit. If you haven't heard of it, go look at the Washington Post. Just put in the Great Resignation, it'll come up. At first, when workers were told to work from home, they had that can-do spirit. They said, okay, we're gonna make this work. And it seemed that though no one in their organizations had thought through any kind of remote plans or digital workspaces, but they were trying to make it work. And it was just supposed to be a short time. So at first, oh, we're gonna be back in the building in June. And then June came and left. Oh, we're gonna be back in the building in November. Then after a while, the expectations began to be so demanding because say a person leaves and nobody replaces that person, and you're trying to figure out how to do all this stuff. It's strange how you were working more hours from home than you were working from the office. That's just really a weirdo thing, except that your home is your office. And I just hate that because I think there should be spaces, different spaces. And when you have all your papers and stuff from work in your office, and then you got to go cook dinner, it's just a nightmare. It's just a nightmare. And then say somebody's home and you're trying to make sure they're not in a Zoom call. It's just really difficult. So there were endless Zoom calls. There's Zoom fatigue, and that is serious. You just can't constantly be on a Zoom call. And granted, it depends on what kind of Zoom calls. My experience are the Zoom calls are these high pressure stress, you gotta be on top of it calls. Some people haven't had that experience. Their Zoom calls have been fun. But I don't know if you've been on a Presbyterian meeting Zoom call, but it's not like watching your show on TV. It's a little different. There are constant and increasing demands. And then the other thing was work creep. You were told that this was your job, then all of a sudden you're doing this part of the job, then you're doing this part, you're doing all this stuff from home. We did General Assembly from home and I almost had a nervous breakdown. It was a nightmare. Because usually you can go to someone and say, hey, can you help me with this? But you have to do it all from your home. It was very difficult. And then there's a blurring of work and home life boundaries. And if you have someone in your home with you who you love, you don't want to be working all the time when you're with them. It's hard to know how to do that well. And of course, animals were completely confused. They were like, will you please leave? You're not supposed to be here right now. Or else they got used to you and they were crawling all over you all the time. So, and then some people decided they didn't really like their careers. They just didn't like it and didn't sign up for this. And so they wanted to do something different. Some people went back to work, and then some people said, I can get better pay and be treated better. And so that's the big quit. Then the next one, these folks in Congress look pleasant enough. They clean up pretty well for a picture day. But the political shenanigans in this country and around the world is just disturbing. And next slide. And now there's a war in Ukraine and a Ukrainian refugee crisis. We'll catch up in a moment. So here are the signs of hope and ways that the Presbyterian Church is showing up. Presbyterian Disaster Assistance is receiving donations and working with our international partners to create address the refugee crisis in the Ukraine. I am so happy to be Presbyterian and have Presbyterian Disaster Assistance. I just don't know how we would really be a functioning church without PDA. The Presbyterian Office of Public Witness, and that's the next slide, in Washington, D.C. is advocating on our behalf with the legislative and executive branches of our government, calling out injustice and working on coalitions to find solutions to challenges facing those who are marginalized in the country. So they're there in Washington, D.C. Well, that was the last, yeah, they're there in Washington, D.C. and they're working with different people. And while some of you all think it's bad, I think if they weren't there and folks weren't there watching and advocating, it might be worse. I don't want to say that out loud, but And then the next slide is at the General Assembly, and in Presbyterian women, there have been anti-racism justice marches, and the 224th General Assembly 2020 affirmed that Black Lives Matter. And then the next slide, though the great resignation may seem awful to some, especially employers who are desperately trying to find work staff, but then sometimes not wanting work staff because it shut down or something, and then wanting them again, but then not wanting them. For employees, for some folks, it's been the best thing that's ever happened to them. And this is unusual because a lot of people quit and didn't have another job. Some decided that they were going to have career changes, and some also decided that they would retire early. And they found better opportunities. And the truth is that a lot of folks like sitting in their pajamas, as you were saying, and not going somewhere. They like waking up and, you fix the top part of your body and don't worry about the bottom part, and do what you need to do. Now, some of us are old school and we got to get it all together. But just in case, we might stand up and people say, well, what is that? And while Zoom fatigue, particularly in certain organizations, is debilitating, and that's the next slide, I think. Many are happy that we have adapted and that we have digital tools available to us like Zoom, Microsoft Teams, WebEx, and other platforms. And I will let you know that Presbyterian women in the National Church offices were doing Zoom before anybody else. They decided that was a good cost-saving method, and so folks were ready to go. And there's a myth that older women aren't going to do technology. The church-wide coordinating team had already figured out how to do Zoom, and they were doing it, and they were saving a lot not having in-person meetings, so they were prepared when this happened. So some of us have found very creative ways to connect in the pandemic, like viral lunches. I don't know if you've had one of those, but if you plan it right, it's fun. If you kind of make it formal, sort of like a Zoom thing, it's not as much fun, but if you plan it so it's fun and you're just chatting on Zoom, it's really fun. Virtual happy hours, virtual family gatherings. I like family meetings and gatherings on Zoom because it starts here, it ends here. You chat and then you go. And for some, virtual dating. And the next sign of hope for me is Presbyterian women. They are a sign of hope. You see anybody that looks familiar to you? You are still showing up, you are still engaging in justice and peace initiatives, and you are still doing the work of the church. Nothing's gonna stop you. You can't stop a Presbyterian woman. You can try, but you can't do it. All right, so, and now we're gonna do this, we're gonna probably have to go to the YouTube. Okay, friends, we're gonna gather back together. So thank you for going with me on the dance break. I didn't know what you all were gonna do or not, but I had an old dance teacher that said sometimes you just have to take a dance break. This is a slide of some of you. Y'all recognize some folks? Okay, and different people. Just to kind of remind us that our churches are still engaging in mission, even and especially during COVID-19. And then the next slide. Yes. I added this slide here because if you were to decide to engage in authentic interracial and intercultural mission work together, you would need to build trust, communicate shared values, figure out what mission together looks like, engage in honest conversations about race, and create a space for people to share their stories and experiences. Back in the day, we had what we call multicultural ministries, and multicultural just means many cultures. But it doesn't mean that you're anything other than many cultures in the same room. Intercultural is different in that there's respect, there's reciprocity, and it's not helpful for people of color to not be able to be who they really are and share their real stories, even if it's painful and even if it's not pleasant. Folks in dominant cultures sometimes don't allow space for that. And so those mission projects aren't really authentic. And in this time where we're really trying to be sure that we are the community of God, we can't continue to kind of not talk about stuff and act like everything's all right. It's just not particularly helpful. And you know that because in your families where you don't talk about stuff, this stuff just it's there, you just don't talk about it. So the best relationships are the ones where you have honest conversations, and then you become the best of friends. And it's a blessing when you have friends of different cultures and you've learned about their experiences. It's unparalleled. It's unlike anything else that I've ever experienced. So I'm praying that you all have had that experience or will have those experiences in the future. The next slide is I got this from Susan Jackson Dowd in Presbyterian Women. The Presbyterian Women's triennial theme is ending violence against women and children. And so I talked to the church-wide coordinating team moderator, Kathy Reeves, and I said, well, if people were to engage in mission projects on this theme, what are some of the things that they might do? And she said, well, it could be something as simple as putting together hygiene kits or providing groceries or helping women's shelters, or assisting in some way women who are fleeing violence. There's also a Justice and Peace book group, and that's a small slide. You may not be able to see it all, but there are different books that are recommended. PW now has a Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Advisory group, and there's a media campaign to prevent child abuse. I do want to mention that during this pandemic, some things that we have been working on have grown even bigger. For women, some women, that is abuse at home. Can you imagine you're in a pandemic, you have nowhere to go really but home, and then you experience abuse at home. And sometimes it's verbal abuse. And so you can't, where's the peaceful environment? You know, it's just very difficult. And for children as well, some children had terrible home lives and they had nowhere else to be but at home. So we need to figure out ways that we can support these women and children. I got a text from a friend of mine, this is the next slide, who is on a phone call now for the UN Commission on the Status of Women. How many of you have heard of that? Okay, it happens every year, and a delegation of women for Presbyterian women and from the Office of Women's Ministries go to New York. And there are all these women from all over the world and all different kinds of issues, and you can learn about people and experiences. Well, this year it is online, and it is March 14th. Today is the 12th, so they must have a pre-call this morning, through the 25th. And I don't know the Zoom link, but there will be a Zoom link. The thing that's kind of beneficial about this being online is you can watch what you want to watch without having to be part of the delegation, get all the papers, sign up, be official, et cetera, et cetera. I think someone in the Presbyterian Women National Offices can, or maybe even somebody in the Senate, I don't know, but somebody in the Presbyterian Women National Offices can help you with how you might connect to that. This year, the theme is climate change and gender equity. So we're gonna do one more small group time. If you would gather with people at your table and answer, what do you need in order to thrive in spite of trauma and difficult conditions that seek to kill or destroy? So we had that scripture that said the thief seeks to kill or destroy. What do you need to thrive? What do you need to thrive? You've talked a lot about your resiliency, but what do you need going forward to thrive in spite of trauma and difficult conditions that still exist today? They haven't gone away, that seek to kill or destroy. Describe a time when you felt resilient. If the first question is too hard, go to the second one. When did you feel resilient? Because that may help you to know what helps you in your resiliency. When did you feel resilient? And how might you join with each other if you so chose and engage in mission together? So you have a few minutes to do that.
Yep, we're back.
All right,
Thanks,
we're gonna
ladies.
come back together as we wind down. All right, so just shout out any themes or practices that came up for you, because some of what you share may help someone else. So what are some of the themes or practices that came up for you, or things you'd like to do?
Just the room. Okay, so online they said creating new relationships, finding new friends,
Creating new relationships, finding new friends.
willingness to join with others, just being in this room together today. 2 Presbyterian women's organizations have come together, and we've brought in a dynamic key speaker.
Thank you. This is a historic moment. Who would have ever thought that coming back to church and coming into this room would be a big historic moment? But it is. Other things that came up for you.
Another one, being able to focus on the world. We have one person, Joyce, who is retired, and she's now focusing more on her art, which she loved, but didn't have time to do. And they're creating relationships with the cancer unit at the hospital, painting tiles in the cancer room so that the people who are lying in that bed have something to look at. That's,
And I'm not sure if you all heard that, but working with cancer patients, and some of you said this on Zoom, so you know what you said, and art, and just ways to give back to others. And I want you to be a little selfish here, and I know that I hear my grandmother saying, you know, that's not what you're supposed to do, but I'd like to take this away from doing for others at the moment. And I'd like to figure out what you need for you. So, because your resiliency is yours, it doesn't belong to anybody else. There's some things that are going to help you to thrive that may not work for other people. So what are some of the things that work for you? Mm-hmm. So those are the hardest words for some women to say. N-O, no, not doing it. So you might need to practice in a mirror. The first time you do it, it's hard and it comes off really hard, like, no, and you go, wait a minute, I just asked you. But then as you get better, then you set your boundaries and your limitations. And why can't you do the things that give you joy? What's wrong with that? So quilting, the things that you know that give you joy. That's very important. Thank you. What else? Uh-huh.
A circle of people that you are close to and you trust and that will support you and just listen to you.
Yes, a circle of people who support you, who you trust, who listen to you. I'm going to tell a pastor story. I would visit people in hospital rooms, and it was surprising to me the differences. You go into some hospital rooms, and it's different now because it's a pandemic, but there were cards. Sometimes there were like 10 people in the room, and all these people. Then you go into other rooms, there's no cards, there's no flowers, and there's no people. And I was always scared of that and nervous of that. I did a funeral once and I didn't even know how to pronounce the man's name because the state paid for his funeral. The funeral director sat in so he'd have a congregation or audience. And when someone came in, I almost wanted to jump to them and say, who is this to you? And that it was his landlord. So it's very important for you to figure out that there are people. And the beautiful thing about a church community is they're here. You don't have to search for them. They exist and you connect to them. The other thing I've discovered is there are friends that you haven't met yet. Did you know that? There are a lot of friends that you haven't met yet. People worry about getting older, maybe going into places or moving somewhere where they don't know anyone. I'm telling you, there are best friends whom you haven't met yet. So if you keep that in your mind, then you know that you are able to adapt and to thrive. But you have to work at it. Like Dr. Phil used to say, they're not going to just jump on the hood of your car or necessarily just walk into your house or your church. So sometimes you have to work on it. Okay, what else? Yes.
I think we have to maintain or to learn a sense of humor.
Yes.
Because I think that COVID-19 was to make all of us pause and realize that prior to a lot of people were at home, we want to homeschool their kids. And after having an experience with COVID-19, you really want to work at home all the time, you really want to homeschool your kids, we have a great appreciation for educators. My parents were educators as my youngest daughter. So I think there was a pause there, but we have to, I love Steve Harvey, he is one of my favorite comedians, and I want to hear everything. Just to get a laugh. You have to maintain this.
Making sure you watch the Steve Harvey Morning Show and make sure you have a sense of humor and can laugh about them. It is fun. And also, re-examining your values, particularly when it comes to education and children. And it's okay to change your mind. You may decide that this is what you want to do and then decide, no, I don't want to do that. Once I bought all these fancy art supplies, and I know some of you are excellent artists, but I bought all this fancy stuff and I just couldn't do it. So I just didn't do it. I kept the turpentine around for years. And then I said, that's a fire hazard. But you just got to figure out. And then I thought, I can go back. I used to be a dancer. I can go back and dance. Well, I can't dance like those 20-year-olds can dance. I'll throw my hip out. So I decided I couldn't do that kind of dance. I mean, it was rigorous ballet and I said, that's not gonna work. But the dance break we had, do you know what endorphins had? The endorphins come in your brain. And I mean, just a little moment. For me, it's ice cream. Go get some ice cream. Just get some ice cream. And some of you all might be lactose intolerant and etc., but do something that just, it doesn't take a lot sometimes to bring you great joy. Or to see a baby. Just look at a baby. Okay, anything else? Thank you. Someone in church said faith. Okay, you can stop. Because you go, you just, yeah, you can stop. Okay, okay. This time has taught us that faith in God is who we are. Having to figure out how to watch church on YouTube and through other means has been at the least a little difficult and challenging, because it doesn't duplicate, I'm sorry, I'm just distracted by all the slides up.
I'm gonna get out of it.
It doesn't, what happens in a physical worship experience in person can't always be shown well on YouTube. The other thing is you have in your head, Hollywood cinematography, and that doesn't, our churches are not Hollywood cinematography. And so it's hard to sit there, and the sound quality is not always really good. But when you're in church and the choir sings and the preacher preaches and you have communion and you look at somebody across the aisle and you connect, that can't always be shown on Zoom or YouTube. So it's been challenging for so many people not being able to meet in person. And as Presbyterians, we do believe in community. So that's what's hard, because we don't believe in just individual faith. It's just about me. It's about community. So we have to explore and figure out ways that we're going to be faithful. And I think if we weren't as good as we needed to be with Bible study or with Christian education, we just need to forgive ourselves. And if we weren't as good with church as we needed to be, we just need to move forward and figure out, what does God want of us now? What does God want of us now? And keep in mind that some of that is your personal spiritual connection to Jesus Christ. Not just your doing for others, but your personal spiritual development and connection to Jesus. You continue to develop regardless of where you are in your life. But then serving others and being with others and listening to others is also an expression of our faith. So what I would like to ask you to do is to accept God's grace. That's the last slide. I shouldn't have said that. To accept God's grace. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to accept God's grace?
I have done enough. Because you've done enough. Because
Okay, be a little bit more specific. What does it mean to accept God's grace? Yes. I'm sorry. That's exactly right. To accept you the way that you are, the way that God has created you. Why do I say that? Because we, especially as women, work so hard to be an idealized version of ourselves. And that's okay. Y'all look beautiful. Thank you. I'm glad for it. But we are not perfect, regardless of how much we want to present ourselves as perfect to the world. And we're not intended to be perfect because we're humans, and humans are flawed. So accepting God's grace means acknowledging that you are not perfect and that God knows that you are flawed and loves you still. I hope you have an experience of someone in your life who loves you more than anything. And if you do, you know that you have not always been the best to that person. You just can't always be your best. But that person thinks that the earth and the moon exists because of you. So it's acknowledging that you are not perfect and that God knows that you're flawed and loves you still. Then the next thing is to give God's grace. So you have to first accept it and then give it. That's your assignment as you leave. And I don't want you to rush through to the giving part. I want you to start with the accepting part. At one of the Presbyterian women gatherings, we were told by one of the people to stand in the mirror and say, "You are my beloved." I am, let's see, was it you? Yeah, I think it was you. "You are my beloved. With you, I am well pleased." And to look in the mirror at yourself while you're doing that. Now, that's not always easy to do. So accepting God's grace. What does giving God's grace mean? I know you all are good at answering this one. Extending God's grace to others. It's extending the same forgiving spirit to others that God provides to you. So we do this every Sunday in church, but it's become a little rote. We confess our sins, and then we have forgiveness that is acknowledged and declared. I don't know that we always believe in that forgiveness, but if we do believe in that forgiveness, then we need to forgive others and extend the same forgiving spirit to others that God provides to you. And in church, we do it every Sunday. So in theory, you mess up and then you get forgiven. Then you go mess up again, you get forgiven. And if you really believe your forgiveness, then you have a total clean slate and you start from this moment forward. But with other people, we carry around a whole lot of grudges and stuff. And as you get older, hopefully, not always, you realize most of that stuff does not matter. If they didn't set the table right or whatever they did, it really doesn't matter in the end. I've lived long enough to see people who were very, very angry at me for whatever reason, perceived or true, all of a sudden treat me like best friends. I don't understand it really, but I've seen it. And I'm grateful for it. And I'm glad that I had a spirit that allowed me to love them even when I didn't understand why they were so mad at me. When you're in positions of leadership, a lot of times people get mad at you, a lot of times. So, and you just have to suffer and make it through and try not to create harm in the midst of it. So finally, grace is a gift of God for us to receive and for us to give away. And remember your baptism. You have been marked as God's own. I'm going to say that again. You have been marked as God's own forever. Thank you for this time together today. This has been a privilege and a pleasure. And we will see some of you tomorrow at West Raleigh Presbyterian Church for worship at 11 o'clock a.m. Thank you.